The sound of engines could be heard in the distance. The vibration of vehicles moving across the ground quickly caught the attention of drone operators. The movement on the ground immediately prompted air surveillance teams to spring into action. Reconnaissance vehicles moving at high altitude began to identify targets that were becoming visible on the ground. When the advancing troops were forced into open ground, the first response was swift. Kamikaze systems glided silently through the air and headed straight for their targets. An attack plan that relied so heavily on speed and maneuverability was suddenly rendered useless. As the targets were hit, speed was no longer an advantage, but a weakness that only served to get them caught more quickly. The first wave was effective, but the attacking groups had not yet been completely neutralized. Air observers detected one of the enemy's systems that enabled them to determine their direction. From this point on, the priority was to eliminate this threat. A silent pursuit began in the sky, and shortly thereafter, the enemy's advantage was neutralized. With this loss, the advancing troops lost their direction. Team coordination broke down, and movements became disorderly. Some abandoned their vehicles and tried to escape into wooded areas, but surveillance continued. Small systems circling overhead tracked every movement on the ground, making escape impossible. A few individuals who were about to reach the critical point were struck by an aerial blow just as they were about to reach their target, changing everything. Although some managed to escape at the last moment, morale was shattered. A soldier collapsed beside a burning vehicle, reflecting the situation in all its clarity. Resistance had been broken. A group tried to take cover in the vegetation, carrying a wounded comrade, but this didn't last long. The aerial patrols located them again, and the attacks continued. The operation continued until there was no movement left. When the reconnaissance teams finally reported that the movement on the ground had ceased, ground forces began to advance into the area. They approached silently. A brief skirmish ensued with the enemy hidden in the shadows. Outnumbered, the last two were neutralized. With no strength left to resist, the soldiers chose to surrender. The traces left behind clearly revealed how the attack had been stopped. The mission was not yet over for the drone operators. They continued surveillance to detect any possible fleeing elements in the area. Always on alert, always ready. The systems gliding through the sky continued to monitor every movement on the ground. Because in this war, it is technology, silent, unexpected, and striking at the most critical moment, that makes the difference. Another group advancing across the terrain was detected. Given the terrain, the convoy's only possible route was clear. As a result, surveillance vehicles had been pre-positioned at key points along the road. The motorized unit was moving swiftly, aiming to cross the area. However, the eyes watching from above had already taken action to thwart this plan. The first reconnaissance vehicle confirmed the number and formation of the convoy. Then, precision strike systems were activated. The lead vehicle of the convoy was targeted. The stationary lead vehicle also blocked the advance of those behind it. Then, the other targets were struck one by one. The roar of engines gave way to the echoes of explosions. The advance had halted, and the troops were at a loss. Being left defenseless in open terrain was the worst-case scenario in such an attack, and that was exactly what had happened. Some soldiers abandoned their vehicles and scattered across the surrounding terrain, but the observation process continued uninterrupted. From above, every step was clearly visible. Attempts to escape were unsuccessful in the face of the operator's determination. Some were caught while trying to take cover, while others were neutralized before they could leave their positions. The tracks on the ground clearly showed the direction of escape, so the operators did not hesitate to target the remaining targets. Silence was restored in a short time. All that remained were smoke, broken pieces, and motionless vehicles. The entire convoy had been neutralized. This was not just a tactical success, but also a strategic victory. Such mobile groups form the basis for coordinated attacks, and eliminating each one prevents a larger attack from taking place. Another day, another attempt. This time, the convoy appeared larger and more organized. Their objective was clear: to move forward quickly and reach the rear lines. However, this movement did not go unnoticed by Ukrainian observers. Reconnaissance systems hovering in the sky were scanning every corner of the area to determine the route. Within a short time, the formation and direction of the vehicles were clearly identified. The moment of first contact was when the silence was broken. The lead vehicle suddenly stopped. Smoke rose from the explosion. Those behind tried to slow down, but this was impossible in the narrow passage. When the convoy came to a halt, the attack intensified even more than where it had begun. The targets were now exposed. Drone operators were monitoring every movement with pinpoint accuracy. As the targets remained stationary, the success rate increased. With each explosion, the morale of the convoy deteriorated, and internal order broke down. Some soldiers jumped out of their vehicles and threw themselves onto the ground. However, this area had already been under surveillance. Attempts to take cover were useless in an area under constant surveillance. Aerial detection made those who fled visible again, and a new attack was launched. The heat of the engines, the metallic glint of the vehicle bodies, or the moving silhouettes scattered around, each was a new target. The last vehicle in the convoy was hit while attempting to reverse. The black smoke rising after the explosion indicated that the operation was nearing its end. The convoy had lost all mobility. This meant not only the vehicles were stopped, but also the plans were halted. The systems hovering in the sky scanned the area for a while longer, aiming to pinpoint the location of any fleeing elements and eliminate any chance of regrouping. Everything was under control. Ukrainian forces had stopped another convoy without deploying a single ground unit. This time, the incoming forces were advancing in a more scattered formation compared to the previous convoys. Thinking that a large group would attract attention, the attackers had chosen to advance in small groups. Their goal was to distract the surveillance systems and infiltrate the area. However, the eyes watching from above noticed this move. Each piece was a threat that made up the whole, and each one began to be tracked individually. There were 3 vehicles in the first group. As they advanced in formation, they increased their speed at a point where the road narrowed. However, the area had already been marked. Surveillance drones had previously scanned this route and established attack coordinates. A silent attack system locked onto the lead vehicle. The moment of the explosion was a signal for those behind, but it was too late. Those behind them didn't even have time to stop before meeting the same fate. The second group tried to approach from a different direction. This unit was moving faster, advancing with short pauses. But that wasn't enough either. The motorized soldiers, thinking they were hidden in the shadows, had actually stepped into areas that had already been identified. The camouflage provided by the wooded areas meant nothing to the systems observing from the sky. Observers who could glide between the branches clearly identified the target's locations. With successive attacks, this group was also neutralized. Some tried to escape by getting out of their vehicles and running. However, the drones were not only carrying explosives, but also acting as trackers. Once the direction of escape was determined, the pursuit began. The operators followed every movement without losing sight of their targets. The final destination was usually marked by an explosion. The few remaining soldiers were scattered around, but they were cut off from each other. Coordination had broken down and communication had been cut off. Most of these soldiers, advancing in a chaotic state, were detected and neutralized before reaching their target. Only silence remained behind. This attempt also ended in failure. Advancing in a scattered manner had made it easier to be eliminated one by one. Ukraine's air superiority had exposed the weakest link in such attacks. Advancing undetected was no longer possible. This time, the movement was detected earlier. Long-range surveillance systems spotted dust clouds on the horizon before the approaching convoy was within sight. However, this was enough for the operators. All reconnaissance drones in the vicinity were directed toward the area. The sky was covered like a net. The convoy was larger than previous attempts. Numerous vehicles were moving in formation on the dirt road. They were moving quickly toward their target, never stopping. However, surveillance systems were waiting for them at the narrowest and most vulnerable point of the route. Drone operators silently devised an attack plan. Each vehicle was marked individually. The first attack targeted the center of the convoy. The goal was to split the group in two. The struck vehicle burst into flames instantly. The vehicles behind stopped, while those in front slowed down. The entire formation was disrupted. This chaos paved the way for a bigger blow. Within seconds, the second and third attacks followed. The convoy was now immobilized. The soldiers inside quickly got out of the vehicles. Some scattered to the right, others to the left. But the area they scattered into had already been observed. Tree trunks, trenches, pits. Each of them was targeted. Surveillance vehicles hovering above transmitted every movement to the center, and the attack systems were directed to the designated points one by one. A few vehicles at the front of the convoy tried to retreat. However, this movement was also detected. The escape only delayed the attack by a few seconds. A drone descending rapidly crashed into the vehicle, and the resulting explosion demonstrated how ineffective this maneuver had been. All communication within the unit had been severed. Coordination had broken down, and the chain of command had been disrupted. Only individual escapes remained. However, the eyes in the sky were able to piece together these scattered movements and continue tracking them, no matter where they went. Eventually, the entire convoy was neutralized. The remains of exploded vehicles, tires buried in the ground, a smoke-filled area. Everything showed the seriousness of the attack. Ukrainian drone operators had stopped another attack attempt without the need for ground forces. When tactical simplicity is combined with technology, this result is no longer an exception, but a familiar outcome. When the attacks ended, only silence remained. Vehicles embedded in the ground, shadows twisting among the flames, and traces on the ground. All were witnesses to a failed attempt to advance. The sky was still full. One last scan was conducted to ensure that everything was over. Every stationary point was checked, and no new threats were detected. After this operation, one thing was very clear. Every step was now being monitored. Moving quickly, splitting into small groups, changing direction suddenly to take people by surprise. None of it worked, because the sky was seeing and assessing every move in advance, and every target detected by these eyes was destroyed within minutes. Ukraine's operations not only stopped an attack, but also prevented greater dangers. Every convoy destroyed, and every unit rendered ineffective prevented greater losses in the future. The objective was clear. Every movement would be detected in advance, and every threat would be eliminated before it even began. Now, the sharpest face of this war was above, a silent, invisible, but absolutely powerful force. Neither the roar of engines nor swift maneuver plans could escape the attention of these eyes. The sky was more determined and more alert than ever before. What are your thoughts on this matter? We would appreciate it if you could share your opinions in the comments section. Thank you for following us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like our content to stay updated and support us.